So let's talk just a little bit about what tends to make effective performance systems from a company-wide perspective. I'm sorry, effective reward systems from a company-wide perspective. Well, you see the things on the screen and they make sense. They need to be clear. You need to be able to accurately measure performance, but there also needs to be some room of flexibility. At the end of the day, you're going to have a real problem with your reward systems is if people see them as just a part of the game. That it's not really about what you do, it's who you know and those sorts of things. So let's talk about when performance using rewards tend to work best. In terms of performance awards, typically through cash and the like, they tend to work best when your need for cooperation company-wide is not that high. In other words, you have some clearly distinct units that are relatively self-contained, so the need for interdependence is relatively low. Maybe even you want competition between various elements. Because in that smaller sector, when you can accurately see who's outperforming whom, then it makes sense to reward them. Often, performance rewards look best when you're not pursuing a lot of innovation. Therefore, it is about executing, and it's all about the cost controls. And obviously, you need to be able to accurately measure what it is that you say you're valuing, and that performance measure should be tied ultimately to firm performance. So this is the typical bonus situation. When might this work very well? If you're in a company that is pursuing an unrelated diversification strategy and you have some very distinct units, it might do well to have tie performance awards not to the overall performance of the company, but to the performance of the individual divisions. Likewise, if you have very interrelated businesses, typically not going to work well because am I going to work really hard on a cooperative issue with this group knowing that it's not going to show up on my bottom line? Human nature says I'm not going to tend to do that, even though for the organization it would be very beneficial were I to do so. And that would be a case where a performance reward might actually be very corrosive. Down to the bottom point, behavioral awards, these are parties, awards where there's no compensation tied, those sorts of things. These tend to work extremely well in very strong culture companies where being employee of the month really means something. And people value being employee of the month more so than a small cash award. Also, you tend to want to do behavioral awards when there is a need for cooperation and interdependence because you want to recognize we're a big team, but I can still recognize individuals in positive sorts of ways, or I can recognize units in positive sorts of ways. Let me just close with a comment about what the research shows. I gave you the Southwest Airlines anecdote on the previous video about how there's strong culture that you don't call in sick over the holidays and make the guys on reserve fly your lines. But, oh, by the way, there's a bonus. You get extra money for flying on those holidays if you don't. Research says those tend not to go together very well. If you have behavioral awards, they are undercut by performance awards. And so the two have a difficult time coexisting. Obviously, Southwest has managed to do this effectively for a long time. We'll see how well they continue to do it. Now I want to radically change subjects. Before, we're talking about how the company leadership and below gets what the performance they're looking for from their workers. Now we're going to look more at the upper tier and say, how do the owners of the company get the performance they're looking for from the managers? And this gets in this idea of agency theory, where you have a separation between the owner and the people that you hire to manage the business on a day in and day out basis. Many of you work in smaller businesses and you see this. The owner is not present on a daily basis. They've hired a set of managers. This whole idea of agency theory is, how do I get my agent, that would be the manager, or what's called the principal, or I'm sorry, the agent, to do what the principal wants on a daily basis. And you can see on the slide, it's where you've delegated responsibility for running the business. They become your agent. So now the question for the principal is, how do I make sure that the agent is doing what I want them to do? What's the principal afraid of? Now let's start from the very best of intentions in the beginning. It could be that the agent has my best interest at heart as the owner or the principal. They're just not very good. They make bad decisions, even though they're trying to be honest. Even if they're making good decisions, they may be pursuing a different goal than what the principal really would prefer. So let's say, for example, the agent is prioritizing long-term growth when the owner or the principal has a short-term need for cash flow. They would frankly prefer that profits be maximized in the short term. Notice that no one is doing anything wrong. Either one of those goals are perfectly legit. They just don't line up very well. And then you have, frankly, the bad behavior that says, what if the agent's basically trying to pull one over on the principal? Now, it doesn't need to be nearly that gross. It can simply be, well, maybe they're doing some things to feather their own nest that are not gross, but the principal would rather they not. How do these manifest themselves? Certainly in the big corporations, you get the idea of the travel perks, the business jets. As an aviator, I think business jets are great productivity tools, but does it become a play toy for the CEO and their personal lifestyle? Pay perks. We'll talk a lot more about pay, but is the CEO doing things for the management team that's really causing them to be overcompensated? Office perks. This was the Tyco Dennis Kozlowski incredible office space and the like. Does that really align with where the money should be spent? Now you start to get into some negative things, side deals. Is the CEO choosing to do business, for example, with a particular bank for the company loans, and then you come to find out that same bank is giving very favorable rates on personal loans to the CEO? And then you have the notion of the managers are taking care of their family and friends by the offer of jobs as opposed to selecting the most qualified. These are the things that a principal worries about. Let's look at these from the standpoint of a corporation. Let's kind of take it from the small company view and elevate it up to the corporate view. To do that, we need to understand the nature of the corporation that we have in the modern day world. And this is a relatively modern thing. So now we have not only a separation between ownership and management, but now we tend to have a very diffuse very diffuse ownership in the corporation. And the beauty of this arrangement is, as an owner of the company, you can lose all of your investment, but you're not responsible for anything further than that because the corporation is a separate legal entity. For example, as I make this video, there are several companies who are under a lot of ethical investigations and the like. Well, for the shareholders, there's no risk that they're going to get sued and have to kick extra money into the corporation. Their liability is limited to their investment in the company. They have the opportunity to reap the profits, but they have virtually no responsibility to actually run the company. That's where the management comes in. Their responsibility is to run the company, but they may have little or no money actually invested in the company. And this gets into the purpose of the board. The board's job is to bridge those two entities, a diffuse ownership and management. And so the board is elected by not the company, not the CEO, but really by the shareholders, and the board is responsible to the shareholders. We'll talk next about how the board handles these sorts of agency issues in the following video.